Alright, welcome back to another compile cards video, custom, of course. That was a lot of alliteration. Anyways, so starting out with Revival. Now this one is a very out-of-the-box kind of protocol, so I can understand if people feel a bit of animosity or just overall discomfort with it. That being said, I'm just going to jump right in. Tagline is, of course, last-ditch effort, and it really plays off that idea of needing to weather maybe some unfortunate circumstances that you face throughout the game, primarily through Revival 0, which is maybe the most impactful. Start, you may flip one covered card in this line, ignore all effects, which is somewhat huge. It's a great counter to Psychic 1. That's a really big reason why people value Psychic so heavily. It can be a great counter to maybe Plague 0. It can be a great counter to what's some other stuff with really top effect heavy stuff. Anyways, you get the idea. Top effects don't really have any huge negation pathways as of now in the game. This is something that's really tailor-made to focus on that, so long as you are a bit intelligent with how you end up playing stuff. Now, middle, you may shift one other card just to give this a bit more use, because this is something that, if you play it, might just get immediately eliminated, whether through flipping, deleting, whatsoever. And that would really kind of suck to play a card, get 2 value out of it, and nothing in return. So that's why that's on there. Arguably, if you shift, conceivably, the start effect, ignore all effects, is supposed to apply just to that line. Which means if you shift something out of your opponent's line, nothing will re-trigger. That's another small advantage of that. Just had to think about that one for a little bit, so apologies there. Moving on, we have Revival 1. Swap the placements of one card in each of your own 2 stacks. Now, this one's kind of fun. I imagine you could do a bunch of value-based shenaniganery with this, particularly in swapping maybe like a 0 and a 6 or something. Now you compile one of those lines and have a really good card in the other. It means that, theoretically, people are going to be playing higher value cards on top of their lines in a lot of cases. Now, those might get flipped or messed with by your opponent, which is obviously, why people avoid doing that. But the upside especially is that now, if you have something where this card then comes into play, you swap, say, like that 5 or that 6 and like a 0 or a 1, the 0 or the 1 is going to become the top card in something. That will re-trigger it, get you a really good effect. The 5 or the 6 is going to get covered. Ideally, that really prevents it from having any annoying stuff happen in the future with your opponent re-triggering, flipping, whatsoever. I think it's a unique idea there, just in that now you have to consider things that weren't in the fray are somewhat possibly back, but also now it's a gamble with your value, right? Do you want that 5 to stay in that line, or would you rather move it around to somewhere else? It's something where either you think very strategically with it and play very late game, or you just go for the immediate compile and hope your opponent doesn't have a way to counter that. Moving on, we have Revival 2, and you may flip a card that has just been shifted, and then shift one covered card to this line. Now, I find this one somewhat interesting, because obviously this is a very conditional effect, right? But for me, I just appreciate when there's a way to counter shift. Right now in the game, there's really not a whole lot you can do. You can't really predict shift, and there's not a whole lot you can do when your opponent gets to shifting. Especially when they start chaining re-triggers, it's a terrible mess. I like this because it at least gives you an option to deal with that. Potentially making an end effect isn't that wise because it can't interrupt those strings of things. However, it does mean then that if your opponent has something, say like speed, and they shift that, you get to flip that. It's also may, of course, so it's not necessary that you do. In this case, it's something where I think it is valuable to have that as an optional effect, just because this might work to your opponent's advantage, your disadvantage a lot of the time. Always worth considering. And then middle effect, shift one covered card to this line, just again giving a bit of use case to that. And then also, it means that if you shift one of your own flipped cards, you get to then shift that, and now that face down card can potentially re-trigger its effect, which is quite nice. Alright, Revival 3, start. You may shift this card out of this line even if it is covered. I quite like that, just because this gives Revival 3 a very easy play, so to speak. And then effects below this card are not re-triggered on shifting. That's a pretty big thing. Basically, this is a bit like Chaos 3 where you can play it in any line. This one is sort of along those lines where it's value that can be apportioned to any place you desire, so long as you have the necessary ability to do that. And conceivably, this could actually help you not compile in certain situations. Because say your opponent, traps you into something where it's like, oh, flip this card, now you're at 11. Oh no. Start effect, this moves out, you don't have to compile. Start effects are before play, which is when compiling happens. So it's actually a very unique aspect to this card as well. Alright, Revival 4, discard a card if you do shift one card. I like this alright. It is definitely actually quite good, especially for a 4. But this, Revival doesn't really have a whole lot of draw, so I feel like a discard here is actually a pretty negative effect. It means that unless you pair it with another protocol that has very high draw and facilitates that cycling, you're actually just going to end up very sapped for cards. It's going to really hurt you in the long run, because more refreshes mean more wasted opportunities to do things. Your opponent can then capitalize on that, and it's a whole thing. You get the idea. Revival 5, discard a card, classic. Nothing more to be said there. Revival, I'll admit I had changed up a little bit. I initially had an idea that was shot down by some of my friends, and I understand why. To have a card, a very specific card, where you can uncompile one of your opponent's protocols. If you were to do that, then that card would be taken out of the game forever. And the reason I ended up not going with that, per my friends, feedback there, is because it brings a different aspect to the game, a lot more negatively than I thought it initially would. Now, a lot of these guys are very hardcore Magic the Gathering fans, and they saw how in that game a lot of things that were very one-off, very unique things eventually started to, more cards would gain that ability, and then it wouldn't be as unique. Then new terms and new complicated add-ons would be brought into the game, and that's how you get something like Exile in Magic the Gathering, where you already had Graveyard, and people were like, okay, that's probably good, but then Exile is now permanently gone, if I'm remembering that correctly. And that's just a thing where Compile is such a more tight and compact and more seamless game than Magic. And I think a lot of the people who play it are drawn to that aspect. They really like it. So for me to introduce something that, one, breaks the state of the game entirely by adding something never before seen, uncompiling a protocol, which I'll admit is a very ambitious idea, frankly, and one that I don't even know necessarily I would like if I were playing against it. And then two, to have, a definitive loss of value, entirely from the game state, is another thing that really doesn't come up in this game. And I know, occasionally some decks will have a slightly different apportionment of value. Like, for example, Love doesn't have a 0, so it has more value than other decks. But it's worked around to balancing that. But having a thing where just value once is there and then is taken away is inherently it's a bit conflicting with the overall nature of the game. So ultimately, I decided not to include that. If you guys think otherwise, let me know, because that was a decision that took a lot of time and brain power, brainstorming, musing through to come to an idea on. Anyways, after Revival, we have Storm, Strike from Above, and I do quite like this one. This one, I've been a little bit in a rut of designing for about a week, and this one just came to me. It really ignited my inspiration again. And, enough with that, let's get on to it. Alright, so, Storm 0. Middle effect, delete one face down covered or uncovered card from each line. Now, I quite like this one, because for me, this really mimics lightning, crashing down, hitting each line. I think that's cool. And uncovered or covered, this is a very destructive ability, obviously. I like this because it's not limited to just your opponent's side. If you have a tactical way to delete a card on your side, re-trigger that, it's very advantageous. Additionally, this isn't necessarily confined to going left-right or right-left. Some cards do have that impact or restraint on them, and for me, I generally don't like that, because it just bothers me. I think as long as the potential is there. You should be allowed to do something, and especially looking at the new rulings and codex, the maximum way to affect the game state is always how you should play it. For the most part, I'm fine with that, but I feel like something like this, where you would be limiting your ability to affect the game state by really standardizing it or constricting it more so through rules, is not the way I would want to go. That's how Storm 0 works. There's some more fun cards in this though. Like Storm 1. Start, you may draw one card. If you do, shift one card, then flip this card. Now, I really was inspired by Death 1 on this a lot, because I really like that idea of playing a card. It comes in useful later, though not necessarily when you had first played it, but then it's sort of like an additional turn, effectively, sort of like a stored turn if you think about it like that, where then it can provide even greater a punch when you need it in those moments. So you may draw one card. That's pretty standard. Same thing with Death 1. And if you do, shift one card, which I think is pretty big all on its own, and then flip this card. And I think that's fair, but I like the idea that this card doesn't get deleted, it just gets flipped. So if you care enough to, you can retrigger this by flipping it. I think ultimately the shift makes it very good, but Death 1 probably still beats it out a little in terms of functionality, just because the idea of deleting another card, you could choose you or your opponent, and then deleting this, like the card that activated stuff, Death 1, usually led to retriggers that were really quite good. So I think tactically this one is a bit better as a blanket thing, but Death 1 really had just greater potential if played right overall. Storm 2, flip one of your opponent's cards. Just your generic 2 flip card, except targeted specifically at your opponent's. A little bit more restrictive, a little bit less you can do with it, but the rest of the Storm is quite good, so I think overall this was just a necessary balance. Storm 3, shift all odd or even cards in one stack to another stack, and I quite like this one, just because we really don't see a whole lot of cards with that sort of functionality on them. Now, you will notice this says stack, so it's not a whole line, and can be used on you or your opponent. Really, this is a bit of a, do you want your value to be rearranged, or do you want to just mess with your opponent, which is always fun. I would say this is very, very good for obviously face-down cards. Say your opponent has, light or gravity or something where face-down cards are a primary. They have them all in one line, and you just move them out of the way because that's easy enough to do. This is a great way to annoy your opponent, and as a 3, this is a pretty good card, especially because you have a little bit more control and ability as opposed to some other effects. Now, Storm 5, you'll notice there is no 4. Classic, discard a card. But now moving on to the 6. The 6, after this card is shifted, flip this card. This card cannot be flipped. So basically, this is a very shift-weak deck, so to speak. And there is that worry there where this card just kind of bogs down things. You can't get that value back once it is flipped. Your only option really is to delete it. And obviously that's not the most beneficial thing overall for anyone, really. It means you effectively lost a turn, lost out on the advantage you could have had with that. So this is definitely a card where you need to be a bit reserved in how you're playing it. You don't want to play it in a way that is negative to you, because then you can't really move it out of the way. And you don't really want to have your opponent target it with any shift cards or anything of the like that could mess with it. I was considering also making this, if this card is flipped, just in general, it can't be flipped over. Or actually, no, that is true. So, if your opponent shifts this card or flips this card, you're out of luck entirely, based on the wording very specifically put on there. Tough luck. Now, you just gotta kind of know that, work around it. It is a 6 after all, so it's gonna have some drawbacks. Overall, that's been Storm and Revival. If you guys like this, let me know. I have more stuff coming up. I'm going to be releasing my, unleash is maybe a good word for it, it's sizable, my doc of custom protocols. I'll just put that in another video somewhere. I'm unfortunately not going to have it open access just because I have a lot of stuff on there I want kept as it is, but, full inspiration, whatever you want to do with it, go ahead. If you want to, there's no copyright or licensing stuff, whatever on it. So honestly, if you just want to copy those entirely, play with them, take inspiration, make your own stuff, go right ahead. I don't really care. If you want to see it, you want to see it. Go ahead. That's about it. the next video, we will be looking at space, the final frontier. And I don't think I've done this in a video yet, so I'm pretty excited for that one. That'll be just about it. See ya.